participation in the resources, allied and related construction sectors increase, thus building a diverse mix of skills required to drive productivity and innovation. AWRA is pursuing this objective through developing support and guidance materials and by facilitating programs that help employers attract, retain and develop female talent. Some of these programs include the AWRA Recognized program, the Gender Diversity Capability workshops that we run on a national level, a toolkit of way forward guides, which a lot of you should have a copy of, or you can get access to it on our website, which is www.awra.org.au, as well as specialist webinars like this one today. So AWRA also provides individual support to women working across Australia's vast resource industry in both professional and corporate roles, and those out in the field through the AWRA e-mentoring program. So focusing on today's webinar, this webinar today will explore the cultural comparisons and implications of Japanese-owned oil and gas company INPEX as its Australian human resources team progresses a strategy of workforce diversity and inclusion at the $34 billion Ichthys LNG development in the Northern Territory. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end of the presentation, but if you had joined us a bit earlier, I had another screen that was visible today to you, which also highlighted a few other key features on our platform, which is the chat box, the questions section, as well as the blue hand tool. These are other ways that you can let us know if you have any questions. So if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them in the questions box and I will ask them on your behalf at the end. So just give me a quick second. Looks like we have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I don't know if you can hear me though.
Yes, I can. However,
sorry, that was an
question.
No, I was just playing around with buttons, sorry.
Okay, all good,
So
no problem. Great, all good. Just to confirm, everyone at this stage is on mute to prevent any background white noise that could, I guess, minimize everyone's hearing ability today. So if you do have any questions, please use those tools and let us know, and I'll be happy to unmute you or ask a question on behalf of you from Catherine. So I'll just pass it on to Catherine now, who will undertake the presentation this afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm assuming that everybody can see my screen now. So I'd like to thank Adriana for inviting me to do this presentation on behalf of INPEX. I'd also like to acknowledge the elders past and present from the Noongar community and the land that we work on, and we overlook the beautiful Swan River, which is a very important geographical thing for our local community here. So through the INPEX journey for diversity and inclusion, I'm going to touch a little bit on the history of INPEX. I'm particularly pleased to see that there's such a diverse group of industries that are participating this morning. We're going to look at where does diversity and inclusion sit in our organisation, who's responsible. There'll be some discussion on the comparative employment environment versus the Japanese employment environment and how that impacts on our ability to have an effect. There's going to be a few statistics. We're going to brag a little around some of our achievements, and we're going to talk around our strategy for the next year. So firstly, for those people that have no understanding of what INPEX does, you should see on the screen here that there's a Japanese timeline and an Australian timeline. INPEX in itself was originally a 100% owned organisation through the Japanese government, investing in oil and gas, predominantly oil in Indonesia, and then it's morphed over the last few years. They were listed on the stock exchange in 2004. 2008 they merged with a Japanese domestic gas organisation, which is where the current INPEX Corporation was founded, and we still have an 18.9% government ownership, or they call it the golden handshake. Around the same time, starting in the 1986, Australia had a small exploration division. The ICFIS field discovered in 2000. First employee in 2009. Now, prior to that, everybody that there had been no entity that they were able to actually employ anybody under, and then we made our final investment decision to pursue the ICFIS project in 2012. So basically, we're a very young company. The ICFIS project is the first one that INPEX has been the operator on, even though they are an investor in over 70 projects around the world. So just 2 slides on the ICFIS project itself. It's very big. We're very proud of it. There's lots of world firsts. The gas and the condensate are coming off the coast of Western Australia, but the LNG will be processed in Darwin, and we have this amazing, nearly 900-kilometre gas export. We're just over 75% of the way through construction, with first gas being expected in 2017. And just a few more brag points there, and you can see a photo of the of what the Darwin processing plant will look like. It's a very important. All the gas has been pre-sold, and it had the largest ever project financing contract in the world. So there's and that has had an impact on how quickly and how fast we've had to move in every part of the business going forward. So, diversity inclusion. In our organisation, when we're trying to explain it, we frame it in 3 main areas. From our corporate social responsibility area, it's very important. It's listed as one of the values and mission from the Tokyo Corporate Social Responsibility, and we have a CSR team here in Perth. We have a global HR team, which are very new themselves, and we also have our people and cultural team that sits under the HR group. So the language I use is that the CSR team tend to look out into the community, social responsibility, reconciliation, community engagement. The global HR are looking at things globally from the company's point of view, from a human resources side of things, looking at values, definitions, how that interacts with communication, and specifically around the Tokyo employees. People and culture team are very much around performance appraisals, the broad cultural training, team building, and they manage our engagement survey. And where we sit is around the side of that. So our interaction is constantly with all of those 3 groups. We report to Tokyo CSR through the Perth CSR team. We interact with global HR as we're trying to establish our global diversity inclusion vision, and we work with a team who are doing a lot of training in this area and broader, so that we're all talking the same language, and our role really is to try and pull this together and represent the company as a whole. So when we look at responsibility, although we're breaking areas, because we're still very new in this area, focus on the ability of an individual to have an effect in diversity inclusion, particularly around the inclusion side of it, because we describe that as a behaviour. And we are a very multicultural, massively growing organisation with this massive project. So there's a lot of change that goes on, and because we have so many different cultures in the organisation, we impress upon individuals that they can have an effect on inclusion, how they behave in their little working pods, who they include in projects, who they have coffee with, who they don't, find behaviour, and how that can have an impact across the business. Because of our Japanese style, we aren't led by the top down in this area. We need to innovate, motivate and influence from the middle, down, up and around. So you'll see here that I've got words like lead by example, encourage and motivate, and look for opportunities across the board. We're trying to make this a normal behaviour, not something that relies on an individual or a manager or a leader driving it down. So just a few points here on some of the big differences between the Australian employment framework and the Japanese employment framework, and how this has an effect on our ability to introduce new programs. One of the first one is around the legislation. Australians are very prescriptive in legislation around equal opportunities and anti-discrimination, and in Japan it's not. In fact, there's little support for in the private sector. There's greater rights if they're working directly for the government. If they're non-Japanese and they're working in Japan, their rights are even less protected. Now the Japanese are trying to do something about that, particularly around bullying, or the which they have a different word for it. They call it power harassment, but it's still very early in its infancy, and it's not commonly used, particularly in a formal organisation or a very conservative organisation like INPEX. The Japanese conservative businesses will hire people as graduates and assume that they will stay with the company for 20 or 30 years. So their tenure is very high in comparison to ours, and their turnover is consequently very low. In fact, it's not common for a conservative Japanese company to employ somebody mid-career. Typically, their career is managed on their behalf. In our organisation, they will be brought in, employed as a graduate, and then regardless of what their degree was, unless they're in a highly technical area, they will be deemed as perhaps general managers that year period, and they'll be moved around the organisation 3 years in this department for very broad understanding. So they don't always have a lot of choice in that. From a management point of view, it's not normal to see a junior Japanese employee speaking up against their line manager. In a group situation, they will not speak up, particularly if there's senior people there. If you want them to interact, you have to ask a very targeted question, and then they're unlikely to criticise the organisation, which is quite different to us. The power of the team is more important to them than the power of the individual, and so they struggle sometimes if we identify an individual and praise them publicly. That's something that they're not comfortable with, and their performance management is interesting. It's very rare for a Japanese employee to be terminated from a company from a conservative to be terminated for poor performance. They're more likely to move them to lower tasks and to adjust, and the people around them will sort of cover up for them. Hours of work, Japanese will typically work very long hours. If they're not a manager, then they do get paid for that, but culturally they're still pressure to stay at the office, and it's being present at the office, not necessarily being particularly efficient or effective in what they're doing, but being present is very important. If a Japanese boss invites you out for dinner, you're expected to go, although typically they don't invite the women, it's a man thing, where a senior Japanese manager will nurture relationships with the younger men, and it's very difficult for them to go home early, so there's an expectation that they will stay for many hours in the night. The retirement age in Japan is 60. There is a encouragement from the Japanese government now to encourage employers to look at short-term contracts for people over the age of 60 to keep them at work. Japan has a very low birth rate and a declining workforce, so they've certainly got some issues there from a labour point of view. So it's interesting to listen to the changes that are going on there in Japan. And of course, from a remuneration point of view, they are paid according to length of time at the organisation and how old they are. So you can see there that there's quite a few differences between their employment environment and ours. And the other thing that's not on the list there is decision making. They make decisions by consensus. It's very rare to have a single manager come down and give a direction unless there's been a lot of stakeholder engagement behind the doors. Now, we will call that namawashi. So if we're looking for a decision, we know that we need to do a lot of work in the background, proving that we've spoken to a very broad stakeholder group. Sometimes they may not have anything directly involved in what you're doing, but depending on their seniority, then you still might need to include them. So that sometimes is a little frustrating for us. So we learn to have a lot of patience and work our way through it. Just a few statistics. Now, in any organisation, gathering data is always a bit of a giggle. We didn't have good systems until the last 18 months, I suppose, to get good data out of our own system. And in Tokyo, it's even harder. The other thing that we're finding is that our definitions of a contractor or a manager aren't consistent with Tokyo. So we're having to do a lot of work there. So for the last few years, the data that we've been collecting has been a little bit higgledy-piggledy. But we did agree at the beginning of the year, for the purposes of publicly giving some explanation, that these are slides that we can work with. So from a headcount point of view, you can see our organisation in Australia has approximately only 30% are employees, 30% contractors and 30% consultants. Now that's a moving feast every month. At the moment we're onboarding a new employee every day, and that's just the nature of where we are in construction. And simply because of the company's use, then that's why there's been so many contractors, and they're people working on a day rate in the organisation, not the second and third tier people, and our reliance on consultants. Whereas Tokyo doesn't do that. So, or they have very few people that aren't direct employees, but their definition of contractor is so different to ours, we've agreed that we will say that they're 100% employees. Now the other interesting data is around ethnicity or cultural identification. Japan as a country has very low immigration. And if you ever get the time or the energy to read some of the history around that, it's very interesting. But from our point of view, our Japanese organisation has very low non-Japanese ethnicity in the company versus our Australian project, which is probably a representation of our country, but it's also because we are around the world in construction at the moment. We don't collect ethnicity or cultural data anywhere except through our engagement survey, and it's free text and it's voluntary. So this is only a vague idea of what we've got, so it's very difficult to judge it. But we can tell just by looking in the office that this is probably a fair representation. The interesting statistic here was the number of people through the project that didn't want to align themselves with any one particular ethnic or cultural group. They called themselves citizens of the world because they just go from one project to another. But the multiculturalism that we have in Australia versus the monocultural or homogeneity that we have in Japan is a very interesting contrast for us and raises a lot of opportunities for discussion between us and our Tokyo peers. The other interesting statistic for us is around gender. Japan as a country has very low engagement of females in the workplace, particularly at the manager level. And you can see here that the graph at the top there represents only about 3% of women in a management position in our Tokyo organisation. For us, it's about 16% in a leadership role. Now, again, we have some issues around definitions of what a manager is versus a leader, but this is a graph that we're happy with. From an overall workforce point of view, they only have about 16% women, whereas we're sitting on about 32%. Now, that's changing for us as we are employing our permanent workforce for the offshore operations and the gas plant. And of course, those occupations are typically very low in female numbers. So it's a moving feast, and it doesn't matter which week we try to measure this data, it's going to be constantly different. But we have agreed between ourselves and Tokyo with the CSR team that we need to do some work around agreeing on some common definitions. And soon, in a couple of weeks' time, there's going to be a workshop around trying to come up with some consensus. The INPEX in Australia is a private company, so we don't need to report through to the ASX through their governance reporting. So the only mandatory reporting we do is through to the Workplace Gender and Equality Agency. And of course, they force you to use their definitions and classification, which, excuse me, don't marry up with all of ours. But it's public information, so at least it's a guide. And you'll see here that our numbers are a little sad on the senior management side. We certainly have high numbers in the non-manager. So we're just starting to look at what statistics are relevant for us to look at, what do we need to do with the information, what we've got it, and who do we need to share it with, particularly as our senior managers and executives aren't asking for it. So it goes back to the comment I made earlier where we need to influence from the middle down, up and around. So we're going to be doing some more work on this in 2016 to come up with some metrics that are relevant and that we can do something with. So where do you start when you're at the beginning? So the department was set up in the middle of 2012. I was on my own initially. I also have a wellbeing portfolio. So really in 2012, didn't do much but needed a framework. So I always look at what do I have to do from a legislative point of view, what are the commitments that we've made internally, and then what should we be doing. So the compliance sort of it really was around the equal opportunities legislation, the workplace gender equality reporting, got some internal commitments. Our company values include diversity. Our corporate social responsibility has some activities that they wish to report on through to shareholders. We've got all of the usual Australian human resource standards, policies and procedures, and then looking at best practice around employee engagement, business outcomes, and of course our reputation. So in 2012, really all we did was look at the equal opportunity training, which we decided needed to be mandatory, and complete our workplace gender reform. 2013 we started getting a little bit more mature. We published our first reconciliation action plan. We did our first ever employee service. The corporate social responsibility team in Tokyo and Perth were a little bit more established. We started looking at a diversity inclusion framework. We had a budget, and I started trying to do a lot of personal education in this area. 2013 was interesting. In Perth, there wasn't a lot, so I needed to go to the eastern states to find out what was going on. 2014, we started getting a really a little bit more traction, focusing on the word inclusion. Until early 2014, we actually didn't have common values globally. So the global values, including diversity, were published in 2014. We did a very comprehensive review of our HR standards, and particularly proud of our parental leave standard, which really was one of the top 3 in our peer group. Started doing a couple of internal workshops around the concepts of diversity and inclusion. Our relationship with Diversity Council Australia was particularly important, and the CEO came out and did some workshops for us, so I was very grateful for their support. Our relationship with Tokyo was starting to become more embedded, and they were becoming more curious and interested in what we were doing. We were very proud of a special Japanese safety training course that we ran. Now, safety training is, everybody does it, but for us, our Japanese workforce that were coming out here, the concepts, the normal concepts in health and safety of standing, talking up and pointing out when something is wrong is culturally something that they weren't comfortable with. So we realised that we needed to develop a standalone course specifically for the Japanese to help them understand our communication expectations around health and safety. And a very big thing that we did in 2014 was me trying to raise the profile and get a little bit of noise happening. I managed to secure the major sponsorship for the Diversity Council of Australia, which cost me $40,000, but I was fascinated by the impact that it had by loudly and proudly standing out at such a public event. And what we did there was we ran a competition to invite anybody in the organisation to join us at the table. So by running that competition and opening 2 seats at the dinner to anybody was fascinating, because it raised awareness. And the other thing was that Tokyo became very interested in it. They struggled with the concept of, we had our Jodie Hatherley, our General Manager of Legal and General Counsel, participated in the debate, and that was something that was very difficult for them to understand, that an individual was debating publicly in this topic. So it was interesting to see the consequences of us doing that sponsorship. And then I was invited to go to Tokyo to do a presentation on diversity inclusion. So, they're big things for us. And 2015 gets a star because we feel that we're getting even more traction this year. So some of the achievements that are coming out of Tokyo is that in January they renamed their Global HR team to Global HR Diversity Inclusion. Now, the Global HR team has a total workforce of 3, but that was still very exciting for us to see that they were starting to take it seriously. This week they've told me that in 2015 they're hiring more female graduates, and they've even employed 3 mid-career employees. So as I said earlier, that's actually not very common. Typically the Japanese are employed as graduates. And they've also recently confirmed they've got some 5 non-Japanese contract employees. It sounds funny given that our Australian organisation is so culturally diverse, but these are big issues. And one of the interesting things in Japan is making sure that they have an environment that is safe for people that don't speak Japanese. For example, the alerts and notices that come over their PA until recently have all been in Japanese, so they have to make some changes so that they make the environment easy if you can't speak Japanese. The Japanese legislation has targets around disability, so our Tokyo organisation are very proud of their number of employees with disabilities, although they've got a very broad definition of disabilities, a lot broader than what ours is. They're starting to publish more information on the corporate website about diversity and inclusion, which we're very pleased of. They're very proud of the fact that they're working hard to have some people over the ages of 60 to 65. They've increased their flexibility for parents. Interestingly, if you are a parent, you are able to request part-time work up to the time your youngest child is 12. Again, if you remember that they expect their employees to stay with them until, you know, for the term of their career, so that makes sense. So they're working hard to increase the flexibility for parents. They're encouraging people to go home a little earlier. I read something earlier this year that they're encouraging people to have 2 days a month where they go home before 6 o'clock. There's also a country focus on gender. The Prime Minister of Tokyo made an announcement at the World Economic Forum that by 2020 he hopes to see the number of females in a management position increase by 20 or 30%. And our own President made an announcement at the beginning of the year that he hopes to proactively seek to hire more female employees and double the number of female managerial staff within several years. And more recently, the Japanese government is starting to talk around putting some targets up for organisations, although they don't actually have to meet them apparently, but they need to start talking about what their aims are around female employment. And saving face is such an important thing with Japan that even though they might not meet these targets, it can be embarrassing for them if they have to publicise what's going on. So that's all very exciting for us. We're starting to see a little bit of energy coming out and a lot more engagement from our point of view, so that makes us excited. From our point of view, a big thing for me this year was one of our senior HR supervisors, one of our shining stars, wanted to return to work after having some parental leave, asked to come back part-time and specifically asked to come and work in diversity and inclusion. So I was really pleased about that. I didn't have a head count, and her line manager, the general manager of HR and the director all worked to make that happen. So that was a big deal to have a dedicated senior HR advisor focusing on this. And it's been very interesting for me to watch her energy and the ability for her to get traction by not having anything else in her portfolio except diversity and inclusion. So I've noticed since she's joined us in only a few months ago that the engagement has increased exponentially, so that's really good. We're finding across the board now people are talking about diversity and inclusion more. We're having people come to us in the kitchen. We're getting a greater access to directors. It's still not fabulous, but we're certainly more than what it was last year. We had more questions in the engagement survey this year. We're starting to run some webinars for education and discussion, and rather than write our own or bring in a consultant, we're taking advantages of webinars like this one and through the Diversity Council Australia, where we're putting up the webinar in a room with good sound and good visibility over the screen and sending out invitations for people to bring their morning tea or their lunch and sit there and listen together, and then an opportunity for discussion afterwards. They're easy to do, they don't cost any money, we're finding that people are really interested in it and then they're going away and talking about it. The other thing that we're going to do is, in previous years we have paid for tables to attend various lunches with 1,000 other people, but my observations were that you didn't get a lot of engagement within your organisation. So we're going to start doing some private lunches, and our first one is in a few weeks, where we're not going to use guest speakers from the normal speaking circuit. We're going to use people who we know through our own network who have been very successful in their jobs and they're still working. And we've got a geophysicist at our first lunch, and it's only lunch for 10 or 12 people, where we will handpick, get general managers and directors to identify people who they think might benefit from attending a lunch, and that's men and women. It's not just for women. So we're quite happy with some of the achievements that we've done there. And I forgot to mention the supply chain. Supply chain is quite important in diversity inclusion. It is a very community-focused area, but we've got a small supply chain team who look at local employment and industry participation, and they're very passionate, and they've had a big effect on our ability in the local environment. And I'm pleased to say that through their efforts, we've had 50 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses which have secured around $100 million worth of contracts covering in excess of 270 scopes of work. So we're particularly proud of that. So when we start looking at 2016, we break our actions down using an extended education model: empower, enable, engage and educate. And that just helps us frame what we're doing. So our big ticket items for next year is to increase our engagement and retention of ATSI peoples. We have 12 ATSI peoples directly employed by INPEX at the moment. We certainly need to do some work around the gender side of things. We're not bad at bringing women into the business, but there's some early indications that they're leaving in higher percentages than our men. So we've got some work to do there to understand that and what does it mean. We need to continue to capitalise on existing cultural diversity and really put some energy around the inclusive culture and educating and support. And we have a very broad cultural framework that is run by our people and cultural team. And they actually use that framework to help describe the behaviours under our values, and they're actually measured in our performance evaluations each year. So very quickly, under empower, which is authority to act, and when we're talking a year ahead around our strategy, they tend to be fairly high general statements, and then we find that once we get into the year, that's when we can really get stuck into getting some results. So we hope to continue pushing forward there with influencing across, up and down and around. From an enabling point of view, we want to really look at our standards to make sure that they are still relevant and best practice. We are particularly pleased with our flexible work options, particularly around people who aren't fit for work. Now we have really low, practically negligible workers' comp, but we have a lot of non-work related illnesses where we use the flexible work options to help people come back to work safely. Our stats around part-timers are still pretty low. We only have 11 part-timers, one is a man, but we are starting to use the right for flexibility in the workplace a little more. We've had one or two using it for transition to retirement. Recently, somebody's using it to do some further tertiary studies for a couple of years. We've got someone else dropping their hours to help with grandchildren care, and of course our parental leave, and also elder care is another reason people are requesting some additional hours. We want to do a little bit more work around our contact officer program and continue our relationship with the Diversity Council Australia. From an educate point of view, we need to continually finesse the equal opportunities training. We want to do a lot of work around getting meaningful HR metrics and make sure that we're producing numbers that we can explain and do something with. and as I said earlier, increasingly create opportunities for listening and discussing diversity inclusion, and increasing our opportunities for internal and external networking. We find even participating in webinars like this and doing the public speaking helps raise the profile internally and creates curiosity, which is something that we're after. So that's it. Thank you very much. Over to you, Adriana.
Thank you for that, Catherine. So thanks, Catherine, for the very detailed presentation. It's really interesting to have heard the ways in which INPEX is actually working hard to ensure the development of their staff and of course to ensure that, you know, a diverse workforce with such cultural influences, obviously having a Western and Eastern culture impact on the work functions. So yeah, I'd like to just open the floor up to any questions if you have any questions. So I haven't received any questions on the chat box. If you do have any questions, please click that blue palm button on your screen and I will unmute you so you can go ahead and ask your questions from Catherine. Well, looks like we actually don't have any questions, Catherine. Okay. So yeah, so I'd just like to thank everyone, especially Catherine, for the presentation this afternoon, as well as everyone who took time off from their lunchtime or busy work schedule to join us today. Just a quick reminder that our next webinar will be held at the end of November, with and the guest speaker for that session will be Technip Oceania, discussing about their gender diversity strategies, achievements and barriers as well. So thank you again everyone for your continued support for AWRA, and we look forward to having you join us for our next webinar in November. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you everyone.
Thank you.